The Ivory Coast is located in Western Africa, bordering the North Atlantic Ocean between Ghana and Liberia. It is a former French colony that gained independence in 1960. Its economy is heavily dependent on agricultural activity. Two-thirds of the country's population is engaged in agriculture sector. Today, the Ivory Coast is world's largest producer and exporter of cocoa beans and a significant producer and exporter of coffee and palm oil, all crops which act as the country's top revenue sources. Yet, despite its agricultural prosperity, the country is steeped in gender inequality, poverty, and it's vulnerable to political conflict. The first problem is gender inequality. The country is a traditionally patriarchal society where many tasks are divided between male and female work. Even the harvesting and processing of cocoa beans has specific steps divided between genders. Yet in 2013, the Ivory Coast had a gender inequality index value of 0.645, ranking 141 out of 149 countries. Women are expected to work in a domestic sphere to support male relatives and coworkers by cooking dinners and caring for dependents. Women are less present in business and political fields. Only 18% of farmland is owned by women, and a woman is usually obliged to take arrangements with her family or husband in order to cultivate food crops. Fortunately, there are multiple solutions for narrowing these gender inequalities. We will provide infrastructure to reduce women's confinement in doing house chores, encourage the pursuit of higher education amongst both genders, and foster opportunities for financial independence. We'll provide rural women with access to modern cookware and refrigeration technology to lessen their burden of confinement to the household. Finally, we'll encourage both men and women to pursue a secondary education so that they may find more career options outside of agriculture and outside of the domestic sphere. The second problem is poverty. 7 years ago, almost half of the population in the Ivory Coast lived below the poverty level. Since then, the Ivory Coast still suffers from the burden of poverty. The country's 2013 Human Development Index is 0.452, which is in the low human development category, positioning the country at 171 out of 187 countries and territories. Based on recent statistics, half of the population have access to electricity, one-fifth have access to a sewage system, and fewer than 15% of the population has access to the internet. Endemic to the issue of poverty is political inefficiency. In 2012, the country's free healthcare system failed, and this year its civil war just ended. Fixing poverty will lead to better infrastructure and political structure. The main reason for this poverty is the country's dependence on agriculture. Its current economy is structured like that of medieval Europe. A class of farming peasants support a small nobility. Two-thirds of the population works for the agriculture sector. In essence, these problems are interrelated. By diversifying the jobs available to both men and women, we will diversify the economy and thereby lessen the number of people reliant on agriculture. We need $10 billion to accomplish our goals. $4 billion for raising the populace out of poverty, $3 billion for empowering women, and $3 billion for ending deforestation in the Ivory Coast. Lowering poverty requires the most funding because we need to dedicate money for scholarships and starting up small businesses. Our female empowerment programs need $3 billion to purchase time-saving devices and fund female scholarships. Finally, our deforestation curbing programs need $3 billion in order to fund our extensive education programs and forest surveillance systems. We will encourage more people to pursue a secondary education and pursue careers outside of agriculture to help diversify the economy and raise the GDP. The Ivory Coast needs an incentive system where we provide money or scholarships to go to secondary school. Then we would aid the influx of higher educated workers by giving them the means to pursue jobs outside of agriculture or find better paying jobs within agriculture that does not involve wage labor. As a result, the economy will be less vulnerable to the world prices of its agricultural goods, and so will its working population's wage. The third problem is deforestation. The Ivory Coast is the most biodiverse country in West Africa. It is home to 1,200 different animal species and 4,700 plant species. Yet, the forests of the Ivory Coast are slowly falling victim to encroaching farmers and residents. Farmers are clearing trees with flash and burning to grow cocoa, and populations living in the forest are burdening the local ecosystem. After the recent violent political conflicts in Ivory Coast, poor people are encroaching further into the forest to make a living. Current efforts to preserve the country's remaining forests are hindered by the fact that there are so few available resources to guard and monitor the forest. We will educate locals on agroforestry techniques, thereby encouraging non-consumptive use of the forest to increase revenue. This could include bioprospecting for genetic resources, ecotourism, and animal ranching. So we will also dedicate resources to surveying the forest and to monitor the rate of the forest degradation better.